Hello and welcome to the channel. Synonymous with Second World War anti-tank warfare was the German Panzerfaust. The Panzerfaust, or literal tank fist in English, was a development of a family of single-shot man-portable anti-tank systems developed by Germany during World War II. The weapon was arguably the first single-use light anti-tank weapon based on a preloaded disposable launch tube, a weapon concept configuration that is still utilised today. The weapon was designed of a light, recoilless launcher tube outfitted with a single preloaded high-explosive anti-tank warhead protruding from the muzzle. It was easy to use, train, cheap, and an effective anti-tank weapon for the common infantryman. The weapon was issued as a single unit, i.e. one preloaded item or count one ammunition, meant to be operated by a single soldier. Firing was done from under the arm at an upwards angle for effective firing, after which the launcher tube was discarded. Experience on the Eastern Front during the Soviet offensive of 1942 and 1943 highlighted the need for a man-portable anti-tank weapon. The appearance of Russian heavy tanks such as the KV-1 and T-34 in 1942 led to a demand for a light but effective anti-tank weapon for infantry use. The current service weapon for this role was the Panzerschreck, an improved copy of the American bazooka, which went some way to filling the gap, but there was still need for something more manoeuvrable that could be issued en masse. Originally based on the system used in the recoilless rifle developed for the Fallschirmjäger, the 10.5cm light Geschütze 40, also commonly known as the LG-40 manufactured by Krupp, which in itself, the LG-40 was basically an enlarged and improved version of the unsuccessful competitor of Rheinmetall's 75mm recoilless gun. The prototype system developed consisted of a 35cm tube with a propellant charge in the centre and a projectile consisting of a hollow charge bomb. It was called the Faustpatrone. The weapon was a major step in the development of infantry anti-tank weapons, but further development was needed. The current weapon being developed used an explosive charge to fire the projectile towards the target, and the backblast offset the recoil, making it easy to fire. The Panzerfaust 30 Klein, or Faustpatrone, was the original version of the Panzerfaust 30, delivered in August of 1943 with a total weight of 3.2 kilograms and an overall length of 98.5 centimeters. The 30 was indicative of the nominal maximum range of 30 meters. It had a 3.3 centimeter diameter tube containing 54 grams of black powder propellant, which launched a 10 centimeter warhead carrying 400 grams of explosives. The projectile range at just 30 meters was similar to that of a hand grenade, and at 98 feet per second could penetrate 140 millimeters of armor. Put into production, the target figures for the weapon were originally designated at 100,000 units per month. An improved version also appeared in August of 1943, which was the Panzerfaust 30. This version had a larger warhead for improved armor penetration. The Panzerfaust 30 was designed to penetrate 200mm of steel and 140mm of armoured steel, but had the same range of 30 meters and consisted of a greater explosive charge of 1.5 kilograms. The barrel had a caliber of 43mm and the length was 104.5 centimeters. The Panzerfaust 30 had a weight of 5.1 kilograms and a muzzle velocity of 45 meters per second. It produced almost no recoil, but did impart a vicious and dangerous backblast. The official instructions were not to stand fewer than 10 meters behind one being fired. The addition of sights meant that it had to be brought closer to the firer, and as such, the tube was extended in length so that the flash was directly behind the holder. The warhead was given thin sheet steel fins which wrapped around the tail shaft while the projectile was inside the tube to stabilize the projectile during flight. The Panzerfaust 60 was the most common and probably the most recognizable version and was completed in early 1944, however did not reach full production until September of that year, with approximately 400,000 estimated units in production. As cited in the book Panzerfaust and Panzerschreck by Gordon L. Rotman, which has been quite useful for the research of this video, it had a much more practical range of 60 meters, and although the muzzle velocity was only 45 meters per second, it would take on average 1.3 seconds from the weapon being fired to the warhead reaching its target at that range. To achieve a higher velocity, the tube diameter was increased to 5 centimeters and 134 grams of propellant were used. It also had an improved flip-up rear sight and trigger mechanism. The weapon weighed 6.1 kilograms and could defeat up to 200 millimeters of armor. The Panzerfaust 100 was the final jump and the final produced version in quantity, completed in September of 1944, however did not reach full production until November of that year. It had a nominal maximum range of 100 metres and held 190 grams of propellant, which launched a warhead at 60 metres per second from a 6 centimetre diameter tube. It had sighted holes for 30, 60, 80 and 150 metres, which were marked in luminous paint so that it could make ranging the correct sights easier in the dark. This version weighed 6 kilograms and could penetrate 220 millimetres of armour. The propellant charge was designed in 2 units separated by an air gap in order to achieve a staggered ignition and a more sustainable thrust. The Panzerfaust 100 went into full production in November of 1944, in addition to that of the Panzerfaust 60. The Panzerfaust then underwent a major redesign and the Panzerfaust 150 was created. This featured a new pointed warhead with a smaller diameter of 105mm compared to the 140mm warhead on the Panzerfaust 30, 60 and 100 series, which increased the armour penetration, and a 2-stage propellant ignition gave a higher velocity of 85 meters per second. A fragmentation sleeve was developed for the Panzerfaust 150 to increase lethality against infantry. The projectile had a delay pellet to the base detonating primer, which meant that the projectile exploded after 3 seconds if it did not hit its target or a hard surface. This was meant to eliminate duds and also allow for airburst to be achieved when combined with the fragmentation sleeve. Production of the Panzerfaust 150 started in February of 1945 and continued to May of that year, where the factory in Saxony producing the Panzerfaust 150 was captured by the Soviets. Although 100,000 units were produced, none were issued beyond limited field trial to troops, and no known examples of the Panzerfaust 150 survived after the end of the war. A further development of the Panzerfaust 150 was meant to make it a reloadable weapon, capable of firing 10 shots before the black powder fouling built up to the point where the weapon needed to be inspected and cleaned. The last development of the Panzerfaust series was the Panzerfaust 250. Intended to replace the heavier Panzerschreck in German service, this design, however, never left the drawing board. It was to use a reloadable tube and to feature a pistol grip, and the projectile was to be based on the one used in the Panzerfaust 150, but the internal propellant charge was proposed to be larger. A trend seen with most late-war German products created was the continued scaling up of every aspect until the larger-than-life designs became too heavily impractical. The projected muzzle velocity was 120 to 150 meters per second, and serial production was scheduled to begin in September of 1945. Much like other post-World War II weapons development, the Soviet RPG-2 anti-tank weapon took some inspiration from the Panzerfaust 250's design. It was reloadable, was a recoilless, man-portable anti-tank weapon that featured a trigger grip and an electrical firing system. In the post-war period, the plans for the Panzerfaust 250 had fallen both into the American and the Soviet hands. The Germans manufactured a total of 8 million Panzerfaust during the final 2 years of the Second World War. Simple in design, it could be produced en masse, cheaply, and due to how easy it was to operate, no specialist crews were required, and it could be operated with little to no training, meaning the weapon could be issued and distributed like grenades. German propaganda towards the end of the war boasted about Hitlerjugend and Volkstorm soldiers using the weapon to great effects against Allied armour. They were especially effective in close-quarter fighting in the rubbles of bombed cities, and due to propaganda and run-ins with Allied soldiers, had a certain degree of psychological value. The Panzerfaust claimed a steadily rising proportion of tank kills, and in Normandy it was estimated that 6% of British tank losses were to Panzerfaust fire, but the proportion rose to about a third later in the war, while Soviet tank losses from both the Panzerfaust and Panzerschreck reached as high as 70%. Due to these facts, Allied tank crews became exceptionally nervous about close-quarter fighting in built-up areas, and tanks were fitted with additional armour, and infantry platoons were assigned to tank companies to protect them from ambushes. The Panzerfaust saw service on many fronts and proved very successful, the most well-known of which being the many battles during the fall of Germany in 1945, and most notably the Battle of Berlin, where Volkstorm and other units who were sometimes issued with nothing but Panzerfaust were sent out to hunt Allied tanks. However, in addition to this, the weapon could be used to massive effect with specialist Fallschirmjäger and other Panzerjäger units. However, despite this, the Panzerfaust had many limitations. The short range put the operator in serious danger of return fire from both armour and infantry, and the dust kicked up from the backblast easily identified the location of the shooter. The weapon was not especially accurate and mechanical malfunctions were common, yet distributed in the millions they became a psychological and very real threat to Allied armour crews, especially in close-quarter urban and wooded terrain. Thousands of Allied vehicles fell victim to Panzerfaust, and had it been developed earlier in the war and issued to more highly trained soldiers, their impact could have been considerably greater. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this video both helpful and informative as always. Again, a lot of this video's research has been aided by the book Panzerfaust and Panzerschrecks, so many thanks to that in that regard. Please consider dropping this video a like and subscribe to the channel as we continue to grow this page closer and closer to the 500 mark. The overwhelming support has once again been very positive and encouraging, and once again, thank you.